Chapter 24, Fractured Fronts, Part 3. The air in the crumbling sanctum of the cult of the Sent Ones was thick with dust and tension, every breath a struggle. Lucas, Mina, and Thomas stood amidst the chaos, watching as the disciple of Earth, a hulking figure of stone and fury, advanced. His rocky armor gleamed with a faint, unnatural sheen, immune to the desperate attacks of the cultists scattered across the ruins. The militia, stationed on the far side of the sanctum, hurled insults as much as projectiles, refusing to cooperate with the cultists despite their shared enemy. It was chaos, and Lucas's head buzzed with their conflicting emotions, a maelstrom of anger, fear, and mistrust. Lucas clenched his fists, his flames sputtering weakly against the disciple's impenetrable exterior. Every blast he sent fizzled, barely charring the surface. The weight of his inadequacy pressed on him like the collapsing walls around them. "Lucas, stop wasting energy," Mina shouted, her voice cutting through the din. She darted forward, her movements a blur, closing the distance to the disciple with inhuman speed. The cultists had thrust daggers into her hands, but she discarded them without hesitation. They were useless. Instead, she leapt, pivoting in midair, and delivered a thunderous kick to the disciple's side. The impact reverberated, sending a shockwave through the room. Cracks spiderwebbed across the disciple's armor, and he stumbled, momentarily off balance. Mina landed gracefully, her sharp green eyes narrowing as she assessed the damage. "Blades won't work. My legs might," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. "Mina," Lucas called, panic threading his voice. "Be careful. He's—" The disciple retaliated, slamming his massive fists into the ground. The earth rippled outward, throwing Mina off her feet. Lucas instinctively reached out with his telekinesis, catching her mid-fall and pulling her back toward him. "Thanks," she said, breathless as she regained her footing. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the disciple and the pair. "We need a plan," he growled. His sword and shield, sturdy, practical tools from his militia training, were raised defensively. "Lucas, focus on finding a weak point. Mina, keep him distracted. I'll hold the line." "What about them?" Mina jerked her chin toward the cultists, who were retreating in disarray. Some clung to their ceremonial weapons, others simply fled. "They're useless." "They're not our problem," Thomas snapped, his tone cold. "Focus." The disciple roared, his voice like grinding stone, and launched another attack. This time, jagged pillars of earth erupted from the ground, forcing Lucas and Mina to scatter. Thomas charged, slamming his shield into the nearest pillar to deflect its trajectory. The force rattled his arm, but he held firm. Lucas darted behind a collapsed column, his breathing ragged. His flames weren't enough, and his telekinesis wasn't precise enough to dismantle the disciple's armor. He felt the familiar ache of doubt creeping in. Mina, however, was relentless. She moved like lightning, her kicks landing with precision, each one chipping away at the disciple's armor. But it wasn't enough. The cracks she created sealed almost as quickly as they formed, the earth regenerating as if alive. "This isn't working," she hissed, landing next to Lucas. "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced. What could he do? His powers felt like a joke compared to the sheer might of the disciple. From the far end of the sanctum, the militia launched a volley of projectiles, arrows and small explosive charges. They struck the disciple, but did little more than distract him. One of the militia commanders shouted, "You lot better finish him off before this whole place comes down." Thomas growled under his breath, blocking another stone projectile with his shield. "They're just waiting for us to die first." "Then let's not give them the satisfaction," Mina said sharply. She turned to Lucas, her expression firm. "You need to stop holding back. If your fire won't work, what else can you do?" Lucas blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" "Think, Lucas. You're more than just fire," she pressed, her voice rising with urgency. "We need you." For a moment, Lucas froze. The weight of Mina's words, and her unwavering belief in him, cut through his self-doubt. He closed his eyes, tuning out the chaos, and reached deep into himself. The disciple advanced again, his steps shaking the ground. Thomas braced himself, shouting over his shoulder, "Whatever you're doing, Lucas, do it fast!" Lucas's eyes snapped open, flickering with a faint golden light. He took a deep breath, steadying his racing heart. If fire wasn't enough, maybe he could use the heat in another way. "Buy me time," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in hours. Mina nodded without hesitation, springing back into the fray. She darted around the disciple, her kicks landing in rapid succession, each one aimed at the same weakened spot on his armor. "Let's see if you can really break," she muttered, a fierce grin tugging at her lips. As Thomas and Mina held the line, Lucas focused inward, reaching for a deeper connection to his powers. If they were going to survive this, he needed to be more than he had ever been before. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Lucas felt a glimmer of hope. Not in his flames, but in himself. The sanctum trembled with every step of the Disciple of Earth, its rocky body towering over the scattered combatants. Dust and heat thickened the air, blurring the lines between attackers and defenders. Mina's strikes danced like lightning against the Disciple's armor, but the cracks they left behind were shallow. Lucas's flames flared again and again, but the stone simply absorbed the heat. It wasn't enough. Lucas crouched low behind a jagged rock formation, sweat streaking his face, heart pounding. "Think, Lucas, think," he urged himself. His telepathic link with Mina buzzed faintly as he tried to piece together a solution. And then it clicked. "Thermal shock," he murmured, the beginnings of a plan taking root in his mind. "What's that?" Torgar growled, kneeling beside him and wiping blood from a shallow cut on his arm. Lucas's voice steadied. "We can't break him outright, but we can crack him. If we heat his body enough and then cool it rapidly, it'll create fractures in the stone. He'll lose his stability." "That's brilliant." Mina's voice rang through their telepathic link, her tone laced with fatigue, but sharpened with determination. "What do you need?" Lucas turned to Torgar. "Where's the nearest source of water?" Torgar grunted, scanning the ruined sanctum. "A fountain, 3 streets east of here. It's small but steady enough." "We'll need to lure the Disciple there," Lucas said, already formulating the next steps. He glanced at Thomas. "Can you get the militia to help us clear a path? If they can hold off the smaller constructs, we might have a chance." Thomas gave a firm nod, his jaw set. "I'll try. They're stubborn, but they'll listen if I can show them it's the only way to survive." Mina flexed her hands, her exhaustion masked by her resolve. "I'll make sure he follows me." Before Lucas could respond, Mina was already in motion, her figure blurring as she darted toward the Disciple. She moved with precision, striking the weaker cracks Lucas's flames had created earlier. Each kick landed with a sharp crack, drawing the Disciple's attention as she shouted taunts. "Over here, you overgrown pile of rubble!" she yelled, her voice carrying over the chaos. The Disciple roared, its molten eyes narrowing on her. It lunged, its massive arms smashing through the ground where she had been seconds earlier. But Mina was already gone, a streak of motion weaving through the crumbling battlefield. Meanwhile, Thomas rallied the militia, his deep voice cutting through their hesitance. "You want to survive this? Then help us hold them back. Keep those constructs away from the path to the fountain." The militia wavered, but Thomas's sheer presence and logic pushed them into action. They formed a defensive line, intercepting the smaller constructs as Lucas, Torgar, and a few cultists followed Mina's lead toward the fountain. Mina reached the street first, her momentum unbroken. She spun mid-run to land a powerful kick against the Disciple's leg, sending shards of stone flying. The creature bellowed and charged after her, each step shattering the cobblestones beneath its feet. The fountain came into view, its once pristine waters now muddy from the debris and ash in the air. Mina skidded to a stop, turning to face the oncoming Disciple. "Lucas, he's here." Lucas arrived moments later, flanked by Torgar and a pair of cultists. His flames ignited again, his hands trembling from the strain. "Just a little longer," he called out, pushing himself forward. The Disciple loomed over the fountain, raising its massive arm to strike. But Mina was faster. She leapt into the air, kicking the arm off balance and causing the blow to miss its mark. The fountain held, its waters cascading freely. "Do it, Lucas," Mina shouted. Lucas gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of strength left in his body. Flames roared to life, engulfing the Disciple in an intense blaze. The creature thrashed and howled, its rocky body glowing red-hot as Lucas poured his energy into heating it. "Now!" Lucas yelled, his voice hoarse. Torgar and the cultists acted quickly, using debris and buckets scavenged from the ruined street to hurl water onto the Disciple. Steam erupted in violent bursts as the water struck the superheated stone. Cracks splintered across the disciple's body, its once impenetrable armor fracturing under the thermal shock. The disciple staggered, its molten eyes dimming. Mina struck again, her kick shattering a weakened section of its chest. Thomas arrived just in time, driving his sword into another crack, further destabilizing the creature. Lucas collapsed to his knees, his vision blurring. His connection to Mina flickered, and he felt a crushing weight of exhaustion press down on him. But as he looked up, he saw the disciple falter, its form crumbling under the combined assault. "It's working," Lucas whispered, a faint smile tugging at his lips, before darkness began to close in. The chaotic roar of the disciple echoed through the city as its battered form reeled from the relentless assault. Steam and debris filled the air around the fountain, where the group gathered for what felt like a fleeting victory. Mina, her breathing steady despite the intensity of the fight, locked eyes with the disciple. Its molten core flickered beneath cracked stone, and for the first time it seemed to hesitate. Lucas slumped against the fountain's edge, struggling to catch his breath. His flames had left the disciple vulnerable, but the effort had drained him almost completely. Sweat dripped down his face as he glanced at Mina. Her fierce determination was palpable even through their telepathic link, but her next move caught him off guard. The disciple turned, its molten form retreating into the shadows of the broken city. Without hesitation, Mina darted forward, her movements a blur. "Mina, wait!" Lucas called out, his voice weak and cracking, but she was already gone. Through their telepathic link, Lucas's voice reached her mind, strained and panicked. "Mina, stop! Come back! It's retreating! You don't have to do this!" Her response came swiftly, firm and resolute. "If we let it recover, it'll come back stronger. This is our chance to finish it." She pushed his voice aside, focusing solely on her quarry. Lucas's heart raced as the link grew fainter. Turning to Thomas, who was rallying the militia nearby, Lucas forced himself upright. "Thomas, she's going after it! You have to protect her! She's alone!" Thomas's brow furrowed, and without a word, he signaled to a few militia members to hold their position before sprinting after Mina. His long strides carried him quickly, but she had already gained considerable ground. Mina's pursuit of the disciple was relentless. Each leap and strike landed with precision, her kicks targeting the weakened joints and exposed core. The creature roared, its movements erratic as it tried to fend her off while retreating deeper into the city. Shattered stone and molten fragments flew with every exchange, creating a dangerous battleground in the narrow streets. The disciple, though damaged, was still formidable. A sudden swipe of its massive arm caught Mina off guard, grazing her side and sending her tumbling into a wall. Pain shot through her ribs as she gasped for air, but she quickly regained her footing. Her emerald eyes narrowed as she pushed forward again, landing a powerful kick to the disciple's exposed core. The creature staggered, its molten form dimming briefly under the blow. Behind her, Thomas arrived just in time to deflect a chunk of debris with his shield. "Mina, are you insane? You can't fight this thing alone!" he bellowed, positioning himself between her and the disciple's next strike. "Then don't just stand there," Mina shot back, her voice sharp but tinged with gratitude. She moved to flank the disciple, coordinating her attacks with Thomas's powerful strikes. Together, they kept the creature off balance, forcing it to retreat further. Back at the fountain, Lucas's frustration boiled over. The telepathic link flickered with glimpses of Mina's struggle, each image a knife to his heart. Ignoring his trembling legs and pounding head, he pushed himself up. "Torgar," Lucas rasped, leaning heavily against the dwarf, "help the others hold the line." "You're not going after them in this state," Torgar replied gruffly, his hand steadying Lucas. "I don't care," Lucas snapped, his voice cracking with desperation. "They need me." Before Torgar could argue further, Lucas stumbled forward, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. His mind reached out instinctively, his telepathic voice trembling but resolute. "Mina, don't you dare die on me." The chapter ends as Lucas takes his first unsteady steps toward the chaotic battle ahead, exhaustion written across his face, but his resolve unbroken.